Think for a moment about age. Not just, birthdays, but how age seems to color so many of our perceptions.
Mm-hmm.
The opportunities we get, the way we see ourselves, even how others see us.
Hmm.
Have you ever noticed yourself making a snap judgment about someone based on their age?
Oh,
Or
definitely.
maybe felt that happen to you?
It's a pervasive thing, isn't it? This tendency to categorize and judge based on age. And it has a name. Ageism.
Right.
The World Health Organization defines it quite clearly. It's a mix of how we think those are the stereotypes,
Okay.
how we feel that's prejudice, and how we act, which is discrimination, all because of someone's age.
And it's not just personal stuff.
No, exactly. What's really important to grasp is that this isn't just isolated incidents. It can be woven into our institutions, play out in our daily interactions, and even, turn inward,
Turn inward. How so?
affecting our own sense of self as we get older.
Yeah.
Self-directed ageism.
Wow. Okay. So it's this really broad phenomenon. And you think for something so widespread, we'd have really good tools to understand it, right?
Yeah.
To measure it.
You would think so. But apparently, a recent UN report highlighted that the existing ways, well, they weren't really cutting it.
Oh.
And that's where our focus today comes in. The newly developed WHO Ageism Scale.
Okay. This new scale.
Precisely. In this deep dive, we're going to explore this new tool, how it was created, what it looks like, sort of under the hood.
It's like a behind-the-scenes look.
Yeah, at how experts are trying to tackle this global issue. And one key thing right off the bat, this isn't just about older people.
Oh.
This scale is designed to look at ageism experienced by individuals of all ages and also attitudes directed towards older individuals specifically.
Got it. Okay, so let's get into the nuts and bolts. How did this scale actually come about? Who was involved?
Well, it was a really significant collaboration. It came out of work between the World Health Organization, the WHO, and the University of Edinburgh.
Okay.
Key people included Vania de la Fuente Nunez and Christopher Micton at the WHO, and Aja Louise Murray and Sufei Lee from Edinburgh Uni.
So a proper team effort. That suggests a pretty involved process, I imagine. What did the development actually look like?
It was quite rigorous, yeah. Multiple stages. The very first step was just establishing a shared understanding.
Of ageism itself.
Exactly. Using that WHO definition and figuring out what the scale needed to do. They brought in experts, looked at existing research.
Setting the foundation then. What came next?
After that groundwork, the experts started generating what they called assertions about ageism.
Assertions. Like
Yeah.
statements.
Yeah, think of them as fundamental statements capturing different bits of ageism, the building blocks for the actual survey questions later on.
Okay, so taking these core ideas and making them measurable, how did they actually make that jump to survey questions?
Ah, that's where you need specialist skills. A psychometrics expert came in, working closely with an ageism expert.
Right.
Their job was to turn those assertions into survey items, following all the best practices for writing good questions.
It's a real science in itself, writing those things properly. So once they had a first draft of questions,
Then the development team did an internal review. A close look.
checking for.
Things like redundancy, were questions repeating themselves? Was the wording clear? And crucially, did the questions really reflect that agreed definition of ageism?
Makes sense.
They also looked for gaps, things they might have missed. And they tidied up some issues with questions about institutional ageism people experience.
Sounds like careful refinement. But I guess an internal review wasn't the final word.
Absolutely not. After that, they cast the net wider, brought in a panel of international experts.
International, from different fields.
Yeah, various academic fields, different WHO regions. These experts used a structured form to rate each potential question
On what basis?
on accuracy, clarity, how acceptable it would be to survey takers, and any potential bias. Really thorough.
Wow. Do we know how many initial questions they were looking at? That sounds like a massive task.
It was huge. They started with 673 initial items.
Good grief.
And the feedback from that expert panel led to more important changes. Rewording for clarity, dropping problematic items, even adding some new ones to cover all bases.
So simplifying language too.
Simplifying language, yeah. And
Yeah.
sometimes integrating introductory phrases into the questions themselves to make them flow better.
It really sounds like a very careful, iterative process. And they had some core design principles guiding them all along, didn't they?
Yes, absolutely. Based on expertise in both ageism and measurement, they set out 6 key criteria.
Okay, what were they?
First, cover all 3 dimensions: stereotypes, prejudice, and discrimination. Second, consider 3 levels: institutional, interpersonal, and self-directed.
Right, the levels you mentioned earlier.
Third, distinguish between experiencing ageism and perpetrating it. Fourth, make sure statements were clearly about age, nothing else.
That seems vital.
Fifth, suitability for all age groups. And finally, cross-cultural applicability. It needed to work everywhere.
Those all sound essential for a really solid measure. And when they were actually writing the individual questions, what were the main goals there?
The focus was really on minimizing bias, making them clear, easy to grasp, especially for people with maybe lower literacy levels.
Accessible.
Exactly. And while English was the starting language, they consciously avoided idioms or expressions that wouldn't translate well.
Right.
They aimed to cover experienced ageism, self-directed, interpersonal, institutional, and also attitudes towards older people specifically.
And that content validity review you mentioned with the experts rating the items, that sounds absolutely critical.
It really was. Each of those 673 items got looked at by at least 4 experts.
Wow.
Combining scale development know-how with deep ageism understanding. They used that structured form rating, accuracy, clarity, acceptability, bias low, moderate, or high.
And they could give written feedback too.
Yes, and that open-ended feedback were incredibly valuable for refining everything.
Okay, so after all that intensive development and review, they had to boil it down to the final questions. Let's talk about that selection, starting with the experiences scale.
Right, so for the final items in the WHO Ageism Experiences Scale, the main driver was content validity.
Content validity, meaning
Meaning they prioritized making sure the scale covered all the important aspects of ageism, not just picking items that looked statistically similar at first glance.
I see. Because just statistical similarity might miss something important.
Exactly. You could end up with a scale that doesn't capture the full picture. So they really weighed up how relevant each potential question was and how well the final set represented all the different facets of ageism.
Okay, aiming for that complete picture of someone's experiences. How many questions ended up in the main experiences scale?
15 items in the main WHO Ageism Experiences Scale. But there's also a shorter 5-item version.
For when time is tight, I guess.
Precisely, for situations with space constraints. But for both versions, the goal was representing all the key domains.
And how do people actually respond? Is it like agree, disagree?
Yeah, it's what's called a 5-point Likert type scale. So strongly agree, agree, neither agree nor disagree, disagree, or strongly disagree.
Standard stuff.
Pretty standard. And there's also a don't know or not applicable option, which gets treated as missing data when scoring. The final score is usually the average across the items.
Okay. And these 15 items, they cover different types of experiences, right?
Yeah.
Can you give us a flavor of the questions in each area?
Sure. They're grouped into domains. For self-directed stereotypes, that's beliefs about ourselves due to age, there are 2 items.
Like what?
Well, a positive one is, at my age, my life has plenty of purpose.
Okay.
And a negative one, I am a burden because of my age.
Oh, that's direct.
Yeah. Then for self-directed prejudice, negative feelings about our own age, there's 1 item, I am embarrassed of my age.
Right.
And self-directed discrimination, limiting ourselves, 2 items, like, due to my age, I limit my participation in discussions even when they are about things that affect me.
Those examples really show that internalized side of it. What about ageism coming from other people?
Okay, so interpersonal stereotypes, what we think others think about us because of age. 2 items there.
Examples.
A negative one. Others think that I have nothing valuable to contribute to society because of my age. And a positive. Others think that at my age, I am able to make decisions for myself. Then 1 item on interpersonal prejudice, how others feel about us. Others feel frustrated with me due to my age.
I can imagine that.
And 3 items on interpersonal discrimination, how others act towards us. For instance, due to my age, other people talk to me as if I need things simplified.
Yeah, that talking down thing. And then the institutional level, the broader society stuff.
Yep, 3 items focus on that, a negative one. Policies made by the government do not meet the needs of people my age.
Like housing, healthcare?
Exactly. There's a positive one, too. People my age are portrayed positively in the media.
Debatable sometimes.
Well, yes. And another negative institutional one. I have been turned down for an opportunity that I was qualified for because of my age, like a job.
Right. That's a concrete example. And some are positive, some negative.
Yeah, overall about 20%, so 3 of the 15 items are positively worded.
That inclusion of positive items seems like a good way to get a more balanced view.
Yeah.
Now, you also mentioned something about formative versus reflective indicators. What's that about?
Yeah, that's an interesting technical point. They see the interpersonal and institutional items as formative,
Meaning?
meaning your overall experience in those areas is like a composite, built up from lots of different interactions or policies. It's not stemming from one single underlying trait within you.
Okay, is the sum of the parts.
Kind of. Whereas self-directed ageism, the stuff we internalize, they see that as more reflective.
Reflecting an internal state.
Exactly. Reflecting a more internal psychological trait or belief system. It's a subtle but important distinction for how you might analyze the data later.
Okay, that makes sense. So when someone sits down to take this survey, what introduction do they get?
Just before the items, there's a short intro. It says something like, the following statements are designed to measure your experiences with different age groups. Use the response options. When answering, think about whether the statement applies in relation to the past 12 months.
And they deliberately used neutral language like experiences with different age groups.
Yes, rather than saying ageism right there, to avoid potentially biasing the responses.
Smart. And why the 12-month time frame specifically?
It's a trade-off, really. Too long, and recall gets fuzzy. Too short, and you might miss less frequent but important events, like that job rejection example.
Right. Finding balance.
Exactly. They acknowledge recall over a year isn't perfect, but it's a pragmatic choice.
Okay. So you've got the responses. How do you actually calculate a score from that?
Right. The scoring reverses the numbers for the positively worded items. So strongly agree gets a 1, strongly disagree a 5. But for negative items, strongly agree is 5, strongly disagree is 1.
So higher scores always mean more ageism experienced.
Yes, exactly. The don't know not applicable answers are treated as missing. Then, to get an overall score, they suggest 2 main ways.
Which are?
The simpler one is the average composite score. Just add up the scores for the answered questions and divide by the number answered.
Yep.
The other, more statistically advanced way involves things like confirmatory factor analysis, or CFA, which looks deeper at the underlying structure.
Right. And what if someone misses a few questions? How do you handle that?
Ideally, they recommend using modern statistical methods like multiple imputation or FEML, full information maximum likelihood, if you have the expertise.
Fancy stats stuff?
Yeah, they handle missing data better. But if that's not feasible, the simpler way is just to average the responses the person did give.
But with a caution.
With a caution, yes. It could slightly under or overestimate the score. And they give thresholds like, for the 15-item scale, if more than half the items are missing, you need to be really careful interpreting that score. For the 5-item one, it's if more than 2 are missing.
Got it. So you've calculated the scores. How do you actually interpret what they mean? Is there like a bad score?
No, there's no designated cutoff point. It's not like a pass-fail.
Okay.
Results are usually presented as the average score for the group studied. And it's good practice to report other stats, too. Standard deviation, the range of scores, how many answered each item.
So it's about comparison.
It's mainly about comparison and context. A higher average score just indicates more reported experience of ageism in that group compared to another, or maybe over time. And it's really important to stress, this is not a diagnostic tool.
No clinical meaning.
Exactly. Scores don't diagnose anything. Researchers need to contextualize their findings, look at the characteristics of their sample, compare with other relevant data.
This all sounds incredibly well thought out. Now, for a global scale, translation is obviously massive. What's the story there?
Absolutely crucial. And it was baked in from the start. The goal was always global usability.
Is it available in many languages already?
Yes, the English original is there, of course, but translations already exist in Arabic, Chinese, Italian, Portuguese, Romanian, Russian, Serbian, Spanish, even Welsh for the short version.
Wow, quite a few. Where do you find those?
They're on the WHO Ageism Scale webpage.
Okay. But what if you need it in a language that's not on the list yet?
Then they strongly recommend using a specific method called Tier APD.
TRIAPD. What's that stand for?
Translation, review, adjudication, pre-test, and documentation. It's seen as the gold standard for producing really high-quality, culturally appropriate translations of surveys like this.
Better than just translating it back into English to check.
Yeah, it's generally considered more robust than relying solely on back translation. It emphasizes getting multiple initial translations and then a thorough review process.
Okay, so it's not just about literal words, but meaning and cultural fit. Can you quickly walk us through those TRAPD steps?
Sure. First, translation. At least 2 people independently translate the scale into the target language.
Different perspectives.
Ideally, yeah. Maybe 1 professional translator, 1 subject expert who knows ageism and surveys. The goal isn't word for word, but capturing the meaning. And they need background info on the scale's purpose.
Makes sense. Then review and adjudication.
Right. The translators get together with a wider review team. They compare the translations, discuss differences, try to reach a consensus on the best wording in the target language.
Led by someone neutral.
Usually led by someone with expertise who wasn't one of the initial translators. They try to figure out why choices were made, find the best fit, tackle tricky phrases where there's no direct equivalent. Then someone makes the final call on each item. And documenting all of this is key.
Documenting the decisions and reasons.
Okay.
Then pre-testing.
Yep. Once you have a pre-final translated version, you test it with a small group from the actual population who'll be taking the survey.
To see if it actually works in practice.
Exactly. Are the questions clear? Easy to understand. Culturally okay. Any confusing bits, awkward phrases, potential offense? You're looking for problems.
How do you do that? Just ask them.
Often using cognitive interviewing. People fill it out, then talk you through how they understood each question, why they answered the way they did. Maybe rephrase questions in their own words. You keep doing it with small groups, maybe 5-10 people, until no new issues are cropping up.
That sounds really useful for catching subtle problems. And the final step, documentation.
Right. Just keeping a meticulous record of the whole process. Instructions to translators, their qualifications, the original scale, all the intermediate drafts, notes, the final version.
Why so detailed?
So anyone looking at it later can understand exactly how that translation was created and why it is the way it is. Transparency and reproducibility.
Okay, so translation is very careful, systematic process.
Mm-hmm.
Now, once it's translated and being used out there, how do researchers confirm it's actually working well in that new context, that it's reliable?
That's the absolutely crucial step of validation. It's not enough just to translate it. You need to check if it consistently and accurately measures ageism in that specific cultural setting.
So does it capture what it's meant to capture there?
Precisely. There are standard psychometric checks, often guided by criteria like Kosman. Things like factor analysis, does it have the expected underlying structure? Reliability, is it consistent? Validity, does it relate to other measures as expected? And measurement invariance.
Measurement invariance.
Yeah, that checks if the scale is measuring the same basic thing in the same way across different groups within that culture, say men and women, or different age groups.
Okay, lots of statistical checks. Any particular advice for researchers doing this validation work?
Yes, the manual gives some key recommendations. One big one is broadening the diversity of people studied.
Not just older adults.
Exactly. Ageism affects everyone, so include adolescents, younger adults too. Also validate it in different resource settings, high, medium, low-income countries. And look at intersectionality.
How ageism interacts with things like disability discrimination.
Right. Methodologically, they suggest looking at divergent validity. Is it different from measures of related concepts? Using advanced stats like item response theory, and using mixed methods.
Combining the scale data with interviews.
Yeah, to get a richer understanding of how people are interpreting the questions in that context. And importantly, they really encourage researchers planning validation to contact the development team at Edinburgh first.
To collaborate. Avoid reinventing the wheel.
Exactly. Facilitate collaboration, avoid duplication.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Now, who is this scale really aimed at? Where could it be most useful?
It's designed to be adaptable from adolescence onwards, so it's potentially useful across the whole lifespan. And once it's properly translated and adapted, it can be used in a huge range of settings.
Like what sort of settings?
Well, academic research, obviously. Systematic studies, comparing groups, large surveys, tracking changes over time, longitudinal studies, even testing if anti-ageism interventions work.
Okay. What about outside academia?
Definitely. Clinical and healthcare settings, understanding patients' experiences, improving equity, informing care models. Community settings, capturing lived experiences, checking if local programs like intergenerational ones are having an impact.
And for policymakers?
Absolutely. Auditing ageism at a system level, assessing the impact of policies, benchmarking levels across countries, maybe linked to global goals.
And even workplaces.
Could be. Evaluating things like diversity and inclusion initiatives, seeing if they actually tackle ageism in hiring or promotion. It's pretty versatile. The manual even includes printable English versions of the experiences scale and one focused just on ageism towards older persons.
It really sounds like it could be a powerful tool in many areas. The manual also mentions open science, doesn't it?
Yes, very much so. The whole project supports open science principles, transparency, collaboration, reproducibility.
How so?
Well, the scale itself is free to use under a Creative Commons license. CCBYNC-SA 3.0 IGO specifically,
Good.
meaning you can copy it, share it, translate it, adapt it for non-commercial purposes as long as you give proper credit to WHO.
Attribution is key.
Absolutely. Always cite the source and be really clear if you've made any changes or adaptations.
In other open science practices, are they encouraged?
They are. Things like pre-registering your study plan, saying what you're going to do before you do it, on platforms like the Open Science Framework.
Why do that?
Increases transparency, reduces bias. Also, sharing anonymized data where possible and ethical, making study materials available. All encouraged, though optional.
And again, contacting the Edinburgh team before validating.
Strongly recommended, yeah. To foster that collaboration and make sure validation efforts are coordinated and efficient.
This has been a really fascinating deep dive into the WHO Ageism Scale. It sounds like a truly robust and carefully considered tool for tackling a huge global issue. If you had to quickly sum up the key takeaways.
I'd say the WHO Ageism Scale offers a comprehensive way to define and measure ageism across its different forms and levels. Its development was rigorous and involved international experts. The Experiences Scale gives us a solid 15-item measure with ongoing work to ensure it works well globally. It's got huge potential application, from research to policy, and its commitment to open science is really important for moving forward together.
And it really highlights just how vital it is to understand and address ageism, doesn't it? For individuals, for society, it's not trivial.
No, absolutely not. And that brings up a final thought, perhaps, for you listening. How might your own views, your own interactions be subtly shaped by age-related biases, maybe unconsciously? It's worth taking a moment to reflect on how ageism might show up in your own life, your community, and maybe think about how a tool like this scale could even be relevant in your own field, your own interest, to help build more understanding and fairness across all ages.
Definitely some really important food for thought there. If you're interested in digging deeper into the WHO Ageism Scale, we really encourage you to check out the manual and the resources online. You can find links on the WHO website and the A World for All Ages site. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.